Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is a sprint of a webinar, 10 AVoIP tips in 10 minutes. We're going to be hanging out after to answer all your questions, so we hope you brought them. The Q&A feature on the bottom of the screen will be active the whole time. We also have a lot of your questions from registering. Thank you for those. This webinar is being recorded. Everyone on the call will receive an email by tomorrow with a link to the recording. On the call, we have Laurent Masia and John Henkel from NETGEAR. Laurent is the Director of Product Line Management for Managed Switches. He also leads the Pro AV Engineering Services team. John is the Director of SMB Product Marketing for NETGEAR. On the BTX side, we also have Chris Poulin, our VP of Technology, as well as Ricky Grassi and myself from the BTX marketing team. That's my intro. John, you want to take it?
Sure. Let's dive in. So we promised these 10 tips in 10 minutes, and then the rest of the time we're going to talk about all this stuff. Thank you for the introduction, Jordan. Great to be here with you guys. BTX is such a really strong partner of ours, and we're happy to support and be here and be part of this. So I talk fast anyway, but I should be able to get through these in 10 minutes. And Laurent will pop in here and there, or then we'll just have plenty of time afterwards for Laurent to answer all your questions. So number one tip you see here, use approved switches. So there are switches that are really made and do better with AV over IP. Of course, we're kind of biased. NETGEAR switches, the M4250 line and M4300, these are made for doing multicasting video and audio. And we'll talk about that. We have special profiles, so they're really built for this. We have other switches that can do it, but they aren't really optimized as well as certain models. So make sure you use those switches first. Number two, get training. If it's new to you, like a lot of us, and I'm an AV guy, IT is new to me. I've been trained since I've been here for a couple of years at NETGEAR, but there are training resources. We'll give you some of those in the chat, and we'll talk about some of that later on. NETGEAR has an academy. There's Dante training all over the place. SDVOE Academy, even for non-SDVOE work, has some really good courses in AV over IP technology. So check those out and get training. Find out the requirements. So you were certainly used to this for your job anyway, but make sure you find out the network requirements. How many endpoints will you have? Is it certainly one box, but there's 4 Ethernet jacks on it that might require 4 connections to your switch? There are things like that you need to make sure that you get the requirements for first, and then figure out the uplinks, things like that. And that's coming up with do the math on the next one. So do the math, meaning if you have a bunch of 1 gigabit streams, add those up, right? The aggregate number of streams will determine what kind of uplink ports you need. We have switches that have 10 gig, 40 gig uplink ports. So that kind of information is critical, and we'll help you through that. We'll talk about our design services team that Laurent heads up. And one of those guys is here on the chat, Neil Smart. So people, information like that will help us get a better idea of the design you need for your AV over IP installation. VLANs. VLANs are something that are kind of uncommon for AV people, certainly, but should be taken advantage of to segregate some of that traffic, make it easier to manage. And Laurent has more info on really what that means. But those are the top things real quick, Laurent, right? For VLANs, it just helps segregate it.
All right, yes. And sometimes we don't need them. But keep in mind that if we can, on small installations, carry a lot of different codecs or protocols or video and audio, when the network becomes bigger, sometimes those protocols, they don't cohabit with the across switches very well. So just remind this, when the network becomes larger, for a better scale, it's always, a good advice to try to separate the control, because you don't want to lose control, John, and, the audio from the video. That's right.
Yep. And we'll go over some of the stuff, some configuration. I'm sure there'll be questions about configuring certain codecs, a certain video with Dante audio or Dante video and audio. We'll cover some of that stuff coming up, but use the VLANs. They're easy to create and utilize that to help make things work smoothly for you. This is something that it seems simple, but people forget. The ports are duplex. So, a 1G port or a 10G port can work both ways, 10G both ways, right? It isn't just one way upstream. You actually have it the same amount downstream. And it's something that took me a while to get my head around too. So don't forget about that in your network design. QoS, or quality of service, is a great thing to have. It can help prioritize certain types of traffic. And I know Laurent will correct me if I'm wrong in stating any of this stuff, but it's not magic, right?
Absolutely, John, because it comes from the IT world. You prioritize the phone, right? The voice over something like your email. When you email to me, it can wait, right? But in the AV world, nothing can wait. The audio must be, immediate, and you can't stand any kind of latency or distortion. And the video, also is a full effort, immediate effort. So QS is not magic. QS is just, there to just prioritize some traffics, but the best advice for AV design is just design your network to be line rate. If you are line rate with no bottleneck anywhere, you just don't need QS.
Inline rate really is just that you have the available bandwidth across the board on the switch. There isn't any limitation, so you don't have to worry about it, right? That's a good way to characterize that. So in certain protocols, certain profiles that we have on our switches do set up QoS for you automatically, things like that. So for most of this stuff, you don't have to worry about it when using a NETGEAR switch with the profiles that we have in our AV interface, but something to think about for sure. The other thing, it seems obvious, I think, but design in scalability. Don't build your system to take up every single port and that's it. Because the minute you want to add another port for one device, it's going to happen. You all know that. So build in some flexibility. We have the switch that was on the first slide here is a 96X switch. It's a modular switch. So you can build it with whatever you need today and then buy another module to plug in extra ports later on when you need them. Things like that are really easy to do. Same thing we talk about uplinks. If you add a second switch, make sure the uplink ports are enough to handle that second switch then. And then you've got scalability throughout your future possibilities. Number 9, creating a dedicated AV network. And this is sometimes a bone of contention, and we could probably do a whole webinar on this, right? I see Laurent smiling. But what's the real benefit of that AV network, Laurent, being separated?
Well, it's just because the convergence, 15 years ago, it was all about the convergence between IT and AV just does not work. It can't work because IT networks are not designed to do AV over IP. First of all, IT admins are scared, and they're right, because multicast can kill the entire network. And more than that, you have oversubscription, top to bottom in IT networks, because you and I, John, we all the time we sleep. That's what we do. So for AV, you need to have a very capable network, no bottleneck. So only a dedicated AV network can make it work. And yes, IT deserves to control, right? So out of band into the AV network, provide control, inventory management, alerts, monitoring, but convergence just can't happen.
And that's a critical thing. It's IT people building the network are going to build it a certain way, and AV people may build it a different way. But together, we need to make sure that we appease the IT concerns for problems that have happened in the past. And the best way to do that is create a separate AV network. And then you can still bridge them together. So that's what we recommend. And that's the way we'll design things if you reach out to our design team. I did see a question about talking about our modular switch, and Neil's answering some of that now, and we can cover that in a little bit. We do want to push on. We have one more. I'm doing pretty good, huh? Not bad for 10 minutes, a minute and a half.
Perfect.
Right. That's
but it's the Midwest, speech pattern where I can just talk a mile in it. That helps immensely, I think. Last one, use quality modules. And this has come up many times since I've been at NETGEAR. So there are certain cheap modules out there so the SFP ports, the small form factor pluggable ports, can take a module to plug in, whether it's a copper or fiber. Typically, I think those are used as fiber for uplinks and for longer distances, but not always. But there are some cheap products out there for sure. We certainly sell our own modules, and we recommend those. We test those with our own switches. So use those first. Use quality modules. Check with our design team if there are some other ones that are not NETGEAR. Perhaps we've tested that you already have that may work fine. But we certainly have seen a lot of problems with some horrible modules, and it's not the switch's fault. They're just bad modules. You don't want a simple little thing like that to take your network down, and that can do it. Laurent, I'm sure you have tons of stories on those to talk about.
Yes, don't get me started on the module.
Yeah. So, and we have discussions internally. We have, of course, we have regular meetings with our engineering team and product team. The Pro AV design team, which we talked about. Neil's part of. Laurent runs that team, a worldwide group of folks who will answer your design questions, design your network for you, help you support and install your network. They have been through all this with tons of customers. So if you have questions about certain configurations, certain modules in this case, they can answer those for you, and they've known what works and what doesn't work. So why go alone? Let us help you and be your friend for that. So 10 tips, 10 minutes, did it. Thanks a lot for coming. Oh, I guess we have a lot of questions to answer too. So, and now it really is kind of up to you guys. Laurent is ready to go walk through some configuration things too. And we can show you some of the cool new things like our Engage controller. Let me stop sharing. You can get those tips, and we can come back and address some of these tips if you want. We can also show you the new and cool things. The Engage controller is a software-based application that'll help show you all the configuration stuff we're talking about with the NETGEAR switches. So if there's any other questions to be answered, we can answer some of those, and you guys can save up your questions.
All right. So
Laurent, if you want to jump into some of the demo, I think that would be a great time. We do have questions from the registration, and a couple that are being addressed in the Q&A right now. For all the attendees, if you want to add questions to the Q&A, we will circle back to them in just a few minutes.
all right. So thank you, Jordan, and great job, John. So yes, I'm not very good at staring at the QA box and chat box. So please interrupt me, okay? As soon as we have a real world question, because what we want to do right now, look at that on this screen. We have 5 switches that are connected to a central fiber switch right now, and we can use those switches to do whatever we want. So at BTX, you have a lot of audio equipment with Dante, such as Audinate, AVIOs and RDL, and you have a lot of video equipment with encoders and decoders and controllers from Atlona, from Kramer, from MuxLab. So we can use all these as good examples, but maybe you want also to derivate and talk about some external control with the core from QSys or a CP4 from Crestron. So we can do that, okay, right now. But see, the first thing I want to tell you is about this new application called Engage. This is a controller, and we are, pardon me, we are in beta right now. And if you are interested in getting your hands on that early version, just get back to us at BTX or at NETGEAR, ProAV Design, netgear.com. You'll test it. You'll just test it. And we'll be live with that application on the 1st of September. So what is that? Well, this is an app that you will install on a PC or a Mac Intosh or a Linux system. When I say installation, it's not really an installation. It's actually just a zip file that you will unzip on a thumb drive or anywhere on your hard drive. And launching it, you will actually discover all the NETGEAR M4250, M4300s, all the AV line switchers for simplicity, so that, this will discover all your equipment. Switches can be brand new. They are not configured yet, but they will still be discovered. All switches are already in production. You will be able to detect them. Same thing, and just onboard them into the controller. And instead of going to the switches one by one in a browser, you will then find them here and centrally configure them. So what is an AV installation? This is a collection of different profiles. Understand templates for certain protocols and VLANs, because maybe you want to segment your network into different VLANs. So on this controller, centrally, we will then just configure all the profiles so that they get propagated to all switches at once. And in this controller, well, you have sites. You can be on the move all the time. You can have multiple sites and just fire up this controller. So this controller will not have to run all the time. This is a configuration thing or a monitoring thing. And of course, when you're done, all the devices are actually provisioned and configured from there. All right. So this is the quick preview. Right now, I'm going to go back to this topology. We are going to say we want to have some simpler abstract view of all these switches. And maybe, John, you can help me now. Just pick one question in the chat box. What should be my first job today? What is that you want to configure?
Oh yeah, good point. We haven't gotten a specific configuration question, but I know Dante and some other video codec is often asked. So maybe you should review one of those situations.
All right, so let's say that we want to configure 1 or 2 or 3 of these switches. Anyway, for us, doesn't going to make any difference because we're going to do it centrally. So let's say you have a job, okay? At BTX today, you have a whole lot of Dante devices like, RDL or Audinate, and you want to keep your Dante separate, right? That's your Dante primary. But then you have a brand new installation to do. You have a whole lot of encoders and decoders, and because we cannot, connect, XYZ together, we're going to say, well, this one is going to be for Kramer with the KDS7, which is a great 1G high-end video over IP solution. So you want to have this as well on the same network with the same switchers. What we are going to do first, we are going to go to our site settings, and we are going to say maybe that the default VLAN 1, which is always there, right? That's your management VLAN. Let's keep it simple. We are going to edit this one, and we are going to say, look, we are going to do audio with Dante on this VLAN. And what does it mean, John? It means that by selecting this template, you select the official certified template for configuring a switch at Audinate for Dante. So instead of spending, maybe a weekend trying to understand the Audinate networking guidelines, you have the DSCP, the QoS, the Bonjour, the multicast, the IGMP, everything is packed for you to use into a certified profile. And that's why it's great to use the NETGEAR AV line, because all these profiles went through extensive certification with more than 200 manufacturers. So we said we are going to do Dante, and we are going to keep the black color for the ports, okay? So we just provisioned one existing VLAN on the switches to do Dante. Now we just said that we have a second application on this network. We want to do some video over IP. We are going to select the video template, and next we are going to give it a name, and because this is going to be a Kramer KDS7 deployments, let's name it here for convenience. Pick up a VLAN ID, that's going to be the VLAN 20, so that you keep the Kramers from Dante separate in their own broadcast domain. Just select a color, also this is for convenience, let's select the green color, and click apply. So now in this network, we have two different VLANs. Every VLAN is properly configured from audio Dante to video over IP. Now, if I go to my devices, remember we got 5 switches around a central 16-port core switch with fiber. If you have other switches that are, like in my case, discovered, you can onboard them when you want. But let's get to the point. What we are going to do first, we are going to take care of the central switch, right? Better to start with the central switch. So this central switch is a 16-port fiber switch. And on this switch, we have the audio Dante and VLAN 1 and the video of Kramer KDS7 all provisioned for you, already. So what we need to do is to go to the network profile. So what you see here is the actual AV user interface that is available in a browser if you log onto that switch directly, right, on its IP address. But here it's even more convenient. The audio Dante is already a VLAN with an IP interface that it picked on my network with the gateway. But let's take care of the Kramer KDS7 VLAN. We are going to edit this one on that very switch. And what we want to do is to assign a DHCP server on that VLAN so that all your Kramer devices get an IP address from the core switch, right? So start with the IP interface of that VLAN on that switch at the core first. Let's maybe take a class C address like a 192.168.20.1 and just fire up the DHCP server so that any device connecting to that VLAN 20 gets an IP address from that DHCP server. Click apply. I know I don't put DNS addresses because we don't want to do internet, right? So we're not going to do it. Your video over IP network is going to be just fine without it. All right, so now on this switch, we have configured the DHCP server. And of course, when we were configuring that profile, we could have selected some ports, but this is the core switch. So no actual device is meant to be connected to that switch directly. And maybe it's the right time for me quickly to explain that the auto trunk feature of the NETGEAR AV line of switches is automatically configuring for you all the trunks, meaning all the links between switches. So all the links between switches are dynamic. They are carrying the VLAN 1 and the VLAN 20. Even if you have a link aggregation with 2 ports or 5 ports, this is going to be done with auto lag. So on the core switch, there's virtually nothing to do, nothing but maybe configuring an IP interface for the DHCP server on one of those VLANs. All right, so we took care of the 16-port core switch. Now let's go to one switch under. So I'm going to take the desktop 4210PX, which is launching as we speak. It's a nice desktop 4250 AV line switcher. This switch also has a profile database that is populated, C. And now at the edge, under the core switch, the only thing we have to do is to select the ports to tell the switch which port is doing what. So by default, all ports do Dante on the VLAN 1, right, John? So now we just need to tell the switch, look, just edit the VLAN 20. And we are going to say that the first half of the port count will participate doing Kramer in the VLAN 20. Clicking apply, those 5 first ports will turn green and you are done. This switch is configured. All the devices connecting to those green ports, being, for instance, AVIOs from Dante, Audinate, they will catch an IP address in the 192.168.20.0 subnet. But if I don't happen to have one device right now, but I'm going to finish with this, it's not mandatory at all, but I just want to show it to you. If you want that VLAN interface, which is the VLAN 20, if you want to have an IP address to it, to turn that VLAN into a layer 3 local VLAN, you can just say DHCP client for that VLAN. And if we wait a little bit, just a little bit, this VLAN 20 locally on that switch will catch a 192.168.20.0 address. You want to see it? Let's switch the page to refresh, go into the overview, and get back to the network profiles. Woohoo! We have our first IP address delivered by the DHCP server on there. So we would do the exact same thing on the other switches. So we just need to go to the switches and say which ports are green, right? For Kramer, and you're done. Because from the topology, let's go back to the abstract view without the clients. From a topology standpoint, the core is doing the interconnection in the middle, right? At the center of the network. Your 2 profiles are provisioned. With auto trunk and auto lag, you can connect the switches around it exactly the way you want. And selecting the ports for each profile on every switch will make your installation 100% certified by Audinate and by Kramer.
Nice, nice. Couple things I want to make sure we reinforce. First of all, how easy that was, right, for all those switches in 5 minutes or something. That AV user interface, so we're showing you the Engage controller, which is coming up September 1st or so. Another question in the chat was when the desktop switches will be coming out. It's about the same time frame, I believe. And I think I saw BTX saying pre-order now, even. So there's that possibility too for the desktop switches. But for the Engage controller, the AV user interface is resident on the M4250 line of switches. So if you get an M4250 switch, you can log into that switch and get the basic configuration for profiles and a lot of other stuff directly on the switch. What Engage gives you, and this speaks to, I think, one of the questions that came up in the chat or Q&A, the Engage now gives you the ability to talk to 4250 switches, but also the 4300s that haven't had that ability. So you can do them both in one. And things like Laurent was showing here, where you can take 5, 6 switches at once and configure them virtually all at once. So those are important things to make sure to point out.
Hey,
I have a question for you.
Yeah, thank you, John. This is absolutely right. So let me show you that, right? We happen to have a orphan switch right now, right? We have a switch that we did not onboard yet, right? But something else we can do, we can take one of the switches that is onboarded and remove it from the controller, right? So if you remove that switch from the controller, it's going to be rediscovered, you know, just right there. So we are going to take this IP address, all right, because now this switch is not in the controller, and we are going to fire up a browser together, all right? And if you go to that IP address, as you just said, because that's a 4250 switch, you have the main IT interface on the right. Don't go there, John, okay? It's really much for IT uses. Everything needed for everything that you need for AV over IP really is in the AV interface. And well, if you log locally on that switch, you will then have exactly what we got just before in the controller, but directly on the switch, right? The AV UI. And if I'm not wrong, actually, do you think I'm wrong, John? If I'm not wrong,
you're never wrong, Laurent. Come on.
We should find our profiles, right? Because they were provisioned by the controller. We removed the switch from the controller. Now I have my Kramer green profile and my Dante VLAN 1 on that switch, so I can continue. So of course, we don't want to do that really, right? If you have a management with the switches in the controller, you should keep them onto the controller, right? So I'm bringing that switch back, because if I do modifications, if I'm altering the config outside of the controller, when I will re-onboard it, you know, it's not easy to get back to a central management. All right, but I want to show you, because nobody really saw it ever. The 4300 switches are, you know, higher end than the 4250s because they have modular PSUs, they can stack, they do 40G with the 96X. We do SDVoE, for instance, with many vendors, and they never got the AVUI. But now, because we bring them into the fantastic world of the AVUI, the 4300s just have it. And we have our Kramer profile that is ready to go. We just need to select the ports on this one. So this is what's coming live. Yes, September 1st. And we really hope that it will simplify greatly all kind, very much, I mean it, all kind of installation. If I can say this like this, it will simplify any installation when you have more than one switch to configure. Because you will discover everything, you will onboard everything, and you will do things centrally instead of redoing it and redoing it again, switch after switch in the browser.
Yeah, you do that once and you're like, okay, there's going to be a better way. And look, now there is. Laurent, you mentioned the modular switch. We talked about it earlier. I mentioned it. There's some questions about that. I got a slide up. If you want to stop sharing, I'll share mine and show you a little bit about that. So this is the 96X switch, M4300 line, right? And it has these modular bays, if you will. You can slide in different ports, different connections, fiber, copper, up to 40G. So multi-gig is supported. The other cool thing I didn't show on this slide, I just got it real quick, sorry. We also have an SDVoE card, encoder card for this switch too. So you can buy that from ZV or DVI gear, and then plug in an HDMI source directly into the switch and encode that into SDVoE. So that's a pretty cool option. But regardless of that, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 bays, right? So you have the option to fill it with 8 or 10, whatever, and leave 2 for future reference, like I was talking about. And we even have a configuration tool for you online, netgear.com/96x-config right there. So you can go configure it with whatever modules you need, get the proper part numbers, and do that. And there's different power supply options as well. There's a PoE Plus card. So this is a monster switch, Laurent. This was a really popular one.
And it works very well with BTX actually, because Bro Data is one of our SDVoE members, and they have great 10G uncompressed video over IP. So you know the difference between 1G and 10G. 1G is highly compressed. So of course latency is, you have a few frames, right, of latency, and sometimes you can stand that latency, right? If you want to have a real-time big screen or a video wall on top of a stage in an opera house, you can't have any difference, right, with the person on the stage. Same thing for medical, and Brodata is very, very good at medical. When you have the surgeon, doing something inside you, looking at the screen, you can't have 3 frames of latency. It's impossible. So the 96X is good because it's all 10G and it's very, very expandable. You said that one of our tips was to design networks with scale, and it's scale now and scale for tomorrow, because what is it today will not be true in 1 week or 1 month. You will always see more rooms in a hospital. You will always see more cameras or more screens, in a headquarter or in a education, college or university. So always keep that in mind, not only on the port counts, because the 96X can expand, but as John said, select switches if you're not sure how many more you will get in the future with a lot of 10G uplinks, at least, so that you can, confidently pump up the multicast volume and have a network that will not die the next month. Yeah.
Thank you. So I know a couple other good chats, and to everybody else, to Jordan, Chris, we just kind of talk amongst ourselves, but pop in if there's something else that we need to address for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, so we're a half hour in. We'll hang out for up to an hour as long as there are questions. For anyone who's not aware, the Q&A is alive and well right now. The aptly named Neil Smart has been quietly responding to many questions as Laurent and John have been going. So please keep the great questions coming.
So there's one I'd like to read through, because I think this is a good one, Laurent. It's a kind of a deeper one. So let me read through what Jeremiah said. He said they use Ruckus switches as core, running L3 firmware with Savant AV over IP on their 4300s and AVBs on the 4250s, but are interested in some designs where they could configure it all with NETGEAR products, not, I guess, have the Ruckus. One struggle they have is the Savant deployment involves some auto configurations, and running the video and our audio switch as core, it's not really something they support, quote unquote, out of the box. What other recommendations or examples would you have for something like this? I see that knowing smile on Laurent's face, so he knows.
Well, I would say go to BTX immediately and swap that Ruckus switch right away. No, take it this way. We have a Pro AV design team, and we work closely with the BTX team every single day, right, to help customers or installers, consultants, system integrators, to figure out what should be done for those switchers. Don't forget that the switches, this is the fabric of your AV by now, right? No more matrix switch, analog, digital, circuit-based systems, right? If the network is no good, even if you have the best solution out there, Savant is great for residential, right? But even if it's a great solution, it's going to be messed up big time, because the packets in the switches are not going to work. So at NETGEAR, with this Pro AV design team, we cannot really put our hands on the Ruckus. We don't want to do that. So we can certainly help to overcome with the Savant automatic configuration because yes, Savant MCU is detecting the NETGEAR switches and configuring them automatically. There's some ways if we want to, overcome that so that you have a better connection with the core. But I think that my advice today would be to consider how much better it would be if it was a real AV network. Keep your core, keep your ruckus for something else, but just uplink for control purpose into the network, the NETGEAR AV network. And yes, this time we could interconnect the 43, the 4250s together and allow for probably a much better experience. That's right.
So here's another question I can actually answer, one of the few that's not as technical, requiring your expertise, but licensing for each protocol is supported. So the only licensing we have on our switches is for the AVB license. Everything else you get from the factory. We're not going to, ask you what kind of protocol you're using, whether it's Kramer or whoever. We're just going to say, here's all the profiles for that. That just comes with it. All those profiles you see come with it. Only extra thing is a separate AVB license. And that's simple. It's a digital license. So we'll email you that license and you can enter it in the user interface. But everything else just comes with it, no question. No hidden gotchas for that. The other question that comes in here is talking about stacking. And we actually talked about this on one of the rehearsals too. And whether we promote stacking or not. The 4300 switches can stack, the 4250s do not. And this is some of a design consideration that I will have to rely on Laurent to discuss some of this and why you didn't choose to make the 4250 stackable and why we may or may not recommend stacking. So there you go.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I am going to reshare my screen right now, okay? Because it's always better when we look at that. So remember, so this is the network I have right now with, and let me tell you the fundamental difference. Why? Between stacking and link aggregation, if you wish, or Ether channel or links, Ethernet links. Fundamentally, stacking is a thing of the past. What you do with stacking, we could stack those switches, actually. We know how to stack, right? The 4300 stack, all other switches we have stack. But stacking is virtualizing all these switches, and you load all the control plane and the management plane on the stack management unit. Remember, John, we used to say master and slave, but you cannot say that anymore, right? So this is the management unit of the stack. It's actually the stack master. This is a big load. And with this ancient technology, it's baked in the switches hardware. It's proprietary anyway. Multicast is replicated all the time. So the big symptom with stacking is that you flood your multicast across the stack links, because the stack ideology or philosophy is that any multicast must be available to any other switch in the stack just in case. You don't want to do that for AV over IP. You don't want to flood your multicast. So we never could fix it, never. So what we have done instead with the 4250s, and this is how we even use the 4300s right now, like the 96X, like, all these switches with redundant PSUs and all that, we use Ether channel link aggregation because we invented something that nobody else in 25 years with Ethernet did before. We invented IGMP+. So whatever you do on that switch up there, or whatever you do on that switch down there, no flooding ever will happen on your network because multicast stays local with IGMP+ automatically. So you don't have to worry. If you have a whole lot of Atlona video over IP encoders and decoders on that switch, but you know that maybe 1 or 2 streams max will be made available to the rest of the network, you don't need to have 20 gigabit or 40 gigabit of bandwidth going to the core, because you know that your Atlona video streams will stay on that switch and never flood. All right? So this is something you cannot achieve with any stack, right? So to go even beyond all this, I want to say that we also invented the auto trunk and auto lag, so that compared to stacking, we have the same experience. You don't configure the trunking anymore. You don't configure your lags anymore because it's all automatic across all these 4250, 4300s. So instead of building a stack, you just connect the switches together here, and you have your IGMP plus, you have your auto trunk and auto lag totally dynamic. And this way you have a good multicast management. Because John, I'm going to stump you maybe. What else you could do if you don't have this IGMP plus thing, with another vendor? How are you going to actually restrict your multicast and make sure it doesn't float?
Yeah, you're going to stump me right away. I know I'm learning more and more every day, but I think that's some of the difficulties, right?
Right. You go with multicast routing, PIM,
Okay.
and you
Oh, yeah,
really
yeah.
need to take a week off, because even in the NETGEAR documentation, and believe me, we are probably easier to use than Ruckus or any other brands out there, but we need 100 pages in the admin guide to just explain how to configure multicast PIM on top of static routes or OSPF, with rendezvous points. It's horrible. So again, the short answer is stacking is not that good because multicast is flooding. Instead, rely on the NETGEAR IGMP plus. And if there's one reason to go to BTX today, this week, or for the next project, is IGMP plus with NETGEAR, because we guarantee that the multicast is not flooding from one switch to the other.
So good time to bring up another question here, and it segues really well. I think we certainly know that we're not the only switch out there, and there are installations that have other switches involved. And we talked about Ruckus for one, but let's say a lot of educational places or some facilities are a Cisco house, and they're reluctant to really get into a NETGEAR switch. But NETGEAR is an IT-based switch. All of our switches are IT-based, and we play well with anybody. So can you talk a little bit about incorporating a NETGEAR switch within a Cisco network or whoever's network? Doesn't really matter to us.
This is correct. And maybe I can take 2 minutes maybe to just tell you a story, because it's actually a true story. I'm probably the only NETGEARian guy who ever entered into the voting rooms of the European Parliament in Brussels, Belgium, center of Europe, right? Europe is not a country, it's a bunch of countries, and you have a parliament it's called the European Parliament. And they do IP now. I mean, they do video over IP, audio over IP, and those rooms, when they go into voting mode, they just disconnect the room from the rest of the world, right? It's actually brilliant. Anyway, many years back, when they were consulting one of the AV over IP vendors, they were said, go with NETGEAR. And yes, the European Parliament IT team said, really? No, we're going to stay Cisco. The whole European community is Cisco, and why would you do that? And yes, it took us, like a half-hour meeting to explain. Cisco is great. Cisco is great for IT. But when it comes to AV, Cisco did not, spend the resources and the time to re-engineer IGMP multicast like we did. So I just explained to the IT team, look, you're going to flood your multicast all over the place. And the only way to not do it is going to go with a very complex OSPF/PIM sports mode and rendezvous points configuration. It's going to be a nightmare. Second, there's still a risk, right? Because any misconfiguration, you are going to flood the multicast, and it's going to kill the rest of your network. And then I asked the question, but what is your point really? NETGEAR, right? We are the most recommended switch line of switches for AV at 200 manufacturers, but what's your point? And they told me, always ask the question, John, when there is a problem, just ask for the problem, right? And they said, we're not going to manage it the Cisco way. And this was wrong. So you're right. After that, what you said is really right. The NETGEAR AV line switchers are IT switches. They just comply with SNMP, with out of band, with VLANs, with whatever. So a decision was made in less than 20 minutes then because they understood that they were keeping their Cisco infrastructure. They were going to do, let's consider it as an ocean, right? This is the ocean. And they were going to build AV islands in that ocean with a direct out-of-band connection for control, for monitoring, for troubleshooting, for management, if you wish, onto those switches. But the AV island is self-containing the multicast without any risk. And actually, after this meeting, they came back to us a number of times just to thank us, because they said, well, you were right. Because the multicast is working great, there's no flooding. And in fact, what they did not tell us at the beginning was that they were very much afraid anyway. Injecting multicast traffic into an IT network is criminal. It can literally kill an IT network because if it's not well managed, it's turning broadcast, right? So that's the answer. There's no good or wrong answer. If this is a Cisco place, we love it because we are just going to create a certified, approved AV islands with AV line switchers.
And really speaking to some of that certification, all of our partners, we have, I think I just updated the website, like 150 partners, manufacturing partners. And some, like ZV, we've worked with for years ago. I mean, from almost before we really started focusing on Pro AV, we're very tight with them, and they're a founding partner of the SDVOE with us, right? I mean, Laurent, you guys, us and ZV go back a number of years, and that's an example of our partnership with that.
All right, so maybe I should say a few things because, yes, SDVOE was conceived or born, if you wish, in 2016 alongside Sony, Christie, Aptovision and all that. But yes, what you just said is very important. I'm going to come back to the BTX ecosystem, right? Because it's important. BTX is offering a large portfolio of AV products. And nowadays, most of them are IP based AV products. And if you want to go confidently, to implement those AV products, you got to rely on a network that is not only working, but certified. So what we've done many, many years ago, and we keep doing it because we have other hundreds of other manufacturers in the certification process, we went to all of them, right? And we said to Atlona, to Kramer, to MuxLab, to all BTX partners, the goal? The goal is that the number of phone calls into your tech support or BTX tech support goes down because you're going to work with us to fix all the bugs because there's bugs all the time, right? And when we fix all the bugs into the switching platform, we know we can push the button and say it's going to work. And this is really important because then a collection of AV products becomes a solution that is approved. Might not be a standard yet, but it is approved and certified.
Yep. Very important stuff. So I think there's been no more questions so far in the Q&A or chat, but let me know what else you guys find that we should cover. We're about 10 minutes from the official top of the hour.
I think you both have fit in more than an hour's worth of value into 50 minutes. I think if we don't have any other questions, why don't we give everybody a 10-minute break before their next meeting?
Awesome. And it's come up on the chat Q&A. Yes, it is being recorded, of course. And you guys will all get a link so you can review.
Yes, a link will go out today or tomorrow to everybody on the call. Feel free to reply to that email with any questions you have. And yeah, John, if you could just, there's one more slide after that, I believe. If you want to mention.
That was it.
Oh, that's the last one we got. Okay. Right. So you want to touch on those links there? Yeah.
So we did this at a different webinar too. So really the most important tip we can give you is to ask us, consult with us first before you do your design, and we can help avoid any pitfalls or problems by talking it over. This is what Neil and Laurent do all the time, And they're one of the team of, I think, about a dozen people that we have, maybe not quite that many, around the world. So no matter where you are or where your job is, if you're on site somewhere, we'll likely have somebody within a couple of hours or less get back to you. And that's pretty huge. That's Pro AV Design at netgear.com. That's Laurent's middle name, actually. Sorry?
That was bonus tip 11.
Yes, that's right. The bonus tip. Yeah, exactly. We'll give you 10. Here's the bonus tip. This one goes to 11. There's a lot of references we can do there. People on this call would certainly know Spinal Tap. The other one that's come up for training, and here's a good resource. It's our own NETGEAR Academy. So netgear.academy. There's no .com or anything there. Just netgear.academy. It's free. You can browse the courses for free. You got to create an account to take them. There's several good ones. The Networking Fundamentals is, as it says, a good fundamental course for learning AV over IP. It's not all just NETGEAR specific information. There's some generic, just multicast AV over IP goodness there. And then there's a more recent one, a switch certification course that does go over the NETGEAR switches and the AV user interface and things like that in a little more depth. And they're all those, I think, or all of them are available for AVIXA credits. Very important. And the Networking Fundamentals course actually is 15 credits. I think they made a mistake, a decimal point mistake, but don't tell anybody. It's 15 credits. That's a really good one to get your AVIXA score boosted up there. And then, of course, in general information for NETGEAR, netgear.com/proav. And you can find Laurent and I on social media, LinkedIn and Twitter and stuff too. So there you go.
Fantastic. In the chat, everybody, you'll see a couple links. We have a link to the NETGEAR switches that are in stock at BTX. We also have a 2-question survey we would love a response to. You can click those as I finish this next and very last sentence. John, Laurent, thank you guys so much. You guys are amazing at this. We really appreciate the time. Thank you to everybody else for attending. And look out for that follow-up email coming later today or tomorrow. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having us.